sexual liberation. It was that sort of connection to the primitive, African roots of rock and roll being displayed by these dances, and soon to be followed by 100 other dances, including the Watusi and different things that were literally, associated with Africans. Mm-hmm. But it was that sort of primitive nature that was inherent in rock and roll that the adults were afraid of, and with good reason. They should have been afraid because it did liberate the entire generation, and generations after that.
Let's talk about then. What is for you then? What sorts of music do you rate rock and roll? Because can we say the Beatles are rock and roll?
Well, yeah. Rock and roll, for me, began in a real way. I mean, for me, being associated with it on February 9th, 1964, which was when the Beatles played a variety show called Ed Sullivan. And I know it's hard for young people to imagine such a thing, but the entire family sat in one room together watching this little black and white TV. And this guy, Ed Sullivan, would have something for everybody in the family on the show, jugglers and opera and, comedians and then something for the teenagers, and that day, February 9th, was the Beatles. And the whole world really changed at that moment.
What was it for you? Did you see it, I think? Yeah.
Yeah, it was...
what impressed you the most?
Well, no one had ever seen anything like it or heard anything like it. The impact, I've said this before, but if you can imagine your favorite park here in Amsterdam, okay? Picture waking up and a spaceship lands there from another planet, The impact of that.
Enormous.
Right?
Yeah.
The Beatles were bigger than that, okay? It was a bigger impact than that spaceship landing because it was completely unexpected. It came at a, important moment. We were still suffering from the assassination of President Kennedy just a few months earlier, and the country was, right at a time when things were getting very exciting, and we were very, very rich at that moment. It was a bit of a depression, suddenly. And they just brought everything back up. They sounded different, they looked different, their hair was different, their clothes were different, they spoke differently. No one had ever seen an English person. There was no such thing as English people having hits on the charts. No, we didn't know what an English person. I mean, you saw, you might have seen, someone in the movies, but young, they were whatever, 20 years old.
Have you ever spoken maybe to Paul McCartney and John Lennon about this or about their impact?
No. No, the only one I ever got friendly with a little bit was Ringo. Never really had a long conversation with Paul McCartney, just spoke a little bit. Never really had a long conversation with him. And I never met John or George, unfortunately.